Hello everyone, and welcome back. There is a quiet kind of mystery that follows us through history. The moments when people look beyond the visible world and wonder if something or someone might be trying to reach back. And tonight, as we settle into another gentle story from the past, we are stepping into an era when that curiosity blossomed into a full cultural movement. So get comfortable, breathe slowly, and let us drift into the strange, fascinating world of 19th century spiritualism. The story begins in a time of rapid change. The mid-1800s were filled with scientific breakthroughs, expanding cities, and new philosophies that challenged old beliefs. Yet, alongside this rush toward modernity, many people still felt a deep longing for meaning, reassurance, and connection. Life was unpredictable, and questions about the unseen lingered in the background of everyday life. This atmosphere created the perfect conditions for a new spiritual trend to bloom. It did not start with grand temples or ancient rituals, but with ordinary households and simple gatherings, people sitting around wooden tables, candles flickering softly, wondering if there might be more to existence than what they could touch. The idea that the world might contain hidden layers was no longer reserved for scholars or mystics. Instead, it became something accessible, something people could try to experience for themselves. Newspapers began reporting unusual stories, traveling lecturers spoke about invisible forces, and curious families experimented with small rituals meant to invite gentle communication from the beyond. For many, this was not about fear or spectacle. It was about comfort, hope, and the possibility of bridging the distance between the living and the lost. As the movement grew, it shaped the social landscape of both Europe and the United States. Spiritualism was not just a belief, it became a cultural conversation, a mirror reflecting the era's deepest hopes and uncertainties. And that is where our journey begins tonight, with the birth of a movement that blurred the line between wonder and belief, inviting millions of people to explore the unseen in the quiet rooms of the 19th century. As the quiet spark of spiritualism began to form, one story lit the flame brighter than any other. Idea 2, the Fox Sisters phenomenon. In the spring of 1848, in a modest home in Hydesville, New York, two young sisters, Maggie and Kate Fox, became the unexpected center of a movement that would sweep across continents. Their world was simple: wooden floors, oil lamps, and the stillness of rural evenings. But it was inside this ordinary setting that something unusual caught everyone's attention. The sisters claimed to hear soft, rhythmic knocks that seemed to respond to their questions. At first, it was a private curiosity, something their family discussed quietly within their small home. But word in the 19th century travelled quickly through neighbours, gatherings, and local newspapers eager for interesting stories. Before long, visitors arrived, intrigued by tales of the mysterious tapping sounds. What made the Fox sisters' story so captivating was not just the noise itself, it was the sense of interaction. People believed the knocks formed a kind of code, a simple, direct way to communicate with something they could not see. For many, this possibility brought comfort during a time when uncertainty and loss were part of everyday life. Soon, the sisters found themselves demonstrating their spirit communication in nearby towns. Crowds gathered in community halls and parlors, sitting in silence, waiting for the taps that seemed to answer questions. Some observers felt a deep emotional pull, as if the universe had suddenly opened a small door to the unknown. Others watched with skepticism, unsure whether they were witnessing a genuine phenomenon or clever theatrics. But regardless of belief, the Fox sisters ignited a cultural wave. Their demonstrations became the foundation for public séances, inspiring countless others to explore spirit communication in their own homes. They turned a quiet household experience into a national conversation, one that blended curiosity, hope, doubt, and wonder. The world might not have fully understood what happened in that little New York home, but it did not matter. The spark had already caught, and from that moment forward, the movement of spiritualism would never be the same. As interest in spirit communication spread beyond small towns and parlor gatherings, people began searching for a clearer, more practical way to receive messages from the unseen. Idea 3. The rise of Ouija, like talking boards. In the mid-19th century, many families were experimenting with different tools, from alphabet cards to homemade pointers, all in the hope of creating a smoother, more understandable form of communication. At first, these devices were simple: letters written on paper, a glass cup turned upside down, or a wooden plank with markings carved by hand. But soon, something more refined began to take shape. These early talking boards worked on an elegant idea. Instead of waiting for tapping sounds or coded knocks, a small pointer, often called a planchette, would glide across a surface to spell out words. Participants placed their fingertips lightly on the tool, believing it allowed unseen forces to guide its movement. What emerged was a method that felt more interactive, almost conversational. Living rooms became quiet stages where families gathered around the board, waiting for the planchette to move. The experience held a strange balance between anticipation and calm. Some believed they were receiving messages from loved ones who had passed on. Others saw it as a gentle exploration of mystery, a way to connect with something bigger than themselves. As the idea spread, handcrafted boards began to appear in shops, each with its own artistic style, flowing letters, graceful curves, and decorative motifs. Although the mass-produced Ouija board we know today would only arrive decades later, these early versions laid the foundation. They blurred the line between household object and spiritual instrument. Not everyone agreed on what caused the movement of the planchette. While some saw genuine communication, others believed it might be guided by unconscious motions of the participants. Yet this debate only fueled the trend further. The uncertainty, that space between belief and explanation, made the experience even more captivating. In these boards, people found a quiet ritual, something both intimate and communal. They became symbols of a time when society was willing to sit together, place their hands on the same surface, and listen for answers carried by the soft glide of wood across wood. As spirit boards and quiet séances began to drift into everyday life, another powerful force helped shape the era's fascination: the Victorian relationship with death itself. Life in the 19th century carried a sense of fragility that modern society rarely experiences. Illnesses spread quickly, medical science was still developing, and families often faced loss at a young age. This reality created a cultural landscape where the boundary between life and absence felt thin and deeply personal. For many Victorian households, mourning was not just an emotional state, it was a structured ritual. People dressed in dark clothing, framed their homes with somber decorations, and followed detailed customs to honor those who had passed on. Portraits of loved ones who were no longer present often sat on mantels or hung quietly on walls, reminding families of connections that time could not erase. In this world, the idea of communicating with the unseen did not feel unusual or frightening. Instead, it felt comforting. It offered a sense of continuity at a time when goodbyes often came too soon. Families who gathered around a table, listening for small signs or trying to read subtle movements of a planchette, were not searching for spectacle. They were reaching for reassurance, a feeling that the people they cared about were not entirely gone. Newspapers and magazines of the era reflected this interest. Articles explored mysterious happenings, personal accounts, and philosophical reflections on what might lie beyond the physical world. Writers discussed these ideas not with fear, but with curiosity and a gentle desire to understand something greater than themselves. This atmosphere made the Victorian period especially fertile ground for the spiritualist movement. It was not only about belief, it was about yearning, a cultural longing to make sense of absence, to soften grief, and to imagine that connections could continue across unseen boundaries. In this way, the fascination with spirit communication became more than a trend. It became a way for people to navigate the emotional landscape of their time, turning uncertainty into ritual and longing into gentle hope. As the fascination with the unseen began weaving itself into daily life, something interesting happened. Séances shifted from private curiosity to social tradition. In many Victorian homes, especially among the middle and upper classes, the parlor, a room meant for receiving visitors, slowly transformed into a setting for quiet, candlelit gatherings where people explored spiritualism together. These were not dramatic performances or theatrical spectacles. Instead, they were gentle, intentional moments shared between friends, neighbors, or family members. The room would be dimly lit, the furniture arranged in a circle, and everyone seated with a sense of anticipation, softened by curiosity. Conversations often started with stories, unusual dreams, unexplainable feelings, or newspaper articles that sparked discussion. Then, as the evening settled, the group would begin their small rituals. Sometimes they used a talking board. Other times, they simply rested their hands on a table, waiting to feel a subtle shift or hear a quiet tap. These gatherings were as much about connection as they were about mystery. People felt a sense of unity sitting together in silence, listening for something beyond themselves. In many households, the séance became a kind of cultural pastime, similar to poetry readings or musical evenings. Letters and diaries from the era described these events with a sense of calm excitement, not a fear of the kind unknown, but an eagerness to explore the questions everyone carried quietly inside. For hosts, preparing a séance often meant arranging the space thoughtfully. Soft fabrics, warm lamp glow, and a stillness that encouraged focus. Guests dressed neatly, aware that the evening was not just entertainment, but a shared moment of reflection. These social séances also provided emotional space for those experiencing grief. Rather than facing their thoughts alone, people found comfort in gathering with others who felt the same longing to reconnect with what was no longer visible. The parlor became a room where silence held meaning, where the boundary between memory and hope felt a little more open. Through these gentle gatherings, the spiritualist movement rooted itself not only in belief, but in community. A collective experience that blended curiosity, companionship, and the quiet desire to understand life's deeper mysteries. As séances became a familiar part of social life, mediums emerged as the quiet guides of this spiritual landscape. Idea 6. Mediums and their techniques. While many families practiced spirit communication on their own, mediums were individuals who believed they had a special sensitivity, an ability to sense subtle impressions, gentle shifts in energy, or intuitive messages that others might overlook. Whether or not the world agreed with these claims, mediums quickly became central figures of the spiritualist movement. Their techniques were diverse, shaped by personal style and the expectations of the era. Some mediums preferred table turning, where participants rested their hands lightly on a table and waited for gentle movements or vibrations. Others practiced automatic writing, allowing their hand to glide across paper in flowing, unplanned lines that seemed to form meaningful words or symbols. There were mediums who entered soft trance-like states, speaking slowly, as if relaying impressions from beyond their own awareness. And, of course, there were those who favored the elegant simplicity of early spirit boards. These methods often unfolded in quiet spaces, with candles flickering softly or curtains drawn to create a sense of calm. The atmosphere mattered. Mediums paid close attention to the mood of the room, encouraging participants to relax, breathe, and approach the experience with openness rather than expectation. Many sessions began with a moment of stillness, not to summon anything dramatic, but to settle the mind and allow people to focus on the subtle sensations they might otherwise ignore. Mediums often described their role as that of a bridge, not someone who controlled the experience, but someone who helped create the conditions for communication. Whether their abilities came from intuition, deep empathy, or a talent for reading the emotional tone of a room, their presence shaped the séance into something structured and reassuring. For participants, the experience could feel gentle and contemplative. It was not always about receiving clear messages. Sometimes it was simply about feeling connected to memories, to emotions, or to the comforting thought that the world might hold more than it seems. In this way, mediums helped give the spiritualist movement both structure and heart, guiding people through rituals that blended mystery, reflection, and quiet hope. As the spiritualist movement spread through homes and parlors, it did not take long for scholars, researchers, and early psychologists to grow curious as well. Idea 7. Scientific and psychological explanations. In the mid to late 19th century, science was expanding rapidly. New discoveries in physics, biology, and human behavior encouraged people to look for natural explanations behind experiences once considered mysterious. So when reports of table movements, soft tapping sounds, and gliding planchettes began circulating widely, investigators stepped forward with a mix of skepticism and genuine curiosity. Some researchers attended séances quietly, taking notes as the room filled with candlelight and anticipation. Others experimented in laboratories, attempting to recreate the motions they had witnessed. Their goal was not to diminish the emotional meaning of these rituals. Instead, they wanted to understand what might be happening beneath the surface. One of the earliest explanations centered around unconscious movement, something later known as the ideomotor effect. This concept suggested that people could move objects like planchettes or tables without intentionally doing so. Tiny, involuntary muscle movements, guided by expectations or emotions, could create actions that felt external, surprising, and significant. Early psychologists also noted how group settings influenced perception. When people gathered in a dim room, focusing together on a single object or sound, Their senses became sharper, but also more open to suggestion. Subtle creaks of wood, drafts of air, or shifting posture could be interpreted as meaningful signs. None of this was meant to dismiss the experience, only to highlight how the mind can blend awareness, hope, and interpretation in intricate ways. Meanwhile, physicists examined the physical aspects, vibrations in wooden furniture, the way candlelight alters depth perception, or how sound behaves in quiet, enclosed spaces. Each explanation added another layer to the conversation, illustrating how complex and delicate human perception can be. Yet, even with these scientific theories, the fascination did not fade. For many people of the era, these explanations did not replace the emotional comfort or curiosity that séances offered. Instead, they simply showed that the human mind is full of subtleties, capable of creating, sensing, and interpreting experiences that feel bigger than themselves. In the end, science did not close the door on spiritualism. It simply illuminated another side of the story. As the spiritualist movement grew larger and more public, it naturally attracted attention from all sides: believers, skeptics, and those who simply wanted to observe. And with that attention came a new chapter in the story. Idea 8: Exposure of frauds. While many people approach spirit communication with sincerity, others recognized that séances created opportunities for theatrical tricks. Some individuals discovered they could imitate the mysterious signs people hoped to see: the gentle tap on a wall, the slight tilt of a table, or the whisper-like movement of a planchette. These illusions required little more than clever timing, hidden mechanisms, or subtle hand movements. Newspapers of the time occasionally published dramatic reports describing investigators who attended séances undercover. They watched closely, looking for strings under tables, concealed assistants behind curtains, or specially modified furniture designed to create unexpected movements. In a few well-known cases, these examinations revealed staged effects meant to appear supernatural. When such exposures became public, they sparked debate across society. Some felt disappointed, realizing that certain performances were not what they seemed. Others argued that even if a few individuals relied on tricks, it did not invalidate the personal meaning millions found in the spiritualist movement. And for many families, their private experiences held significance, regardless of what happened in more theatrical demonstrations. These controversies also encouraged people to reflect more carefully on the nature of belief and perception. The era saw the rise of scientific societies, investigative committees, and public demonstrations meant to distinguish genuine experiences from staged ones. Instead of silencing the movement, this scrutiny added another layer of complexity, a reminder that human hope, curiosity, and interpretation often blend in unpredictable ways. Mediums who were sincere continued their work quietly, relying on calm settings rather than dramatic effects. Meanwhile, the exposures served as cautionary tales, prompting participants to approach séances with a balance of openness and discernment. In the end, the story of frauds did not erase the movement's impact. Instead, it highlighted the tension between human longing and human creativity, and reminded society that the search for connection, meaning, and comfort can sometimes inspire both genuine exploration and theatrical imitation. By the time the 19th century drew to a close, spiritualism had woven itself so deeply into society that its influence extended far beyond parlors and quiet evening gatherings. Idea 9. Cultural impact and legacy. Even as skepticism and scientific debate surrounded the movement, its cultural imprint was undeniable. It changed the way people talked about the unseen, encouraged open conversations about life, memory, and hope, and created a shared language for exploring mysteries that had once been discussed only in private circles. For many, spiritualism offered a new way to process uncertainty, not through fear, but through curiosity and reflection. One of the most significant outcomes was the rise of paranormal societies, groups dedicated to studying unexplained experiences with structured methods and careful observation. These organizations laid early groundwork for what would later become modern investigations into unusual phenomena, blending scientific interest with human fascination. A photography still a developing art at the time also found itself transformed by the movement. People experimented with long exposures and creative techniques, producing images that seemed to capture faint shapes or soft silhouettes. While these photographs often had simple technical explanations, they still shaped the era's imagination and influenced early visual storytelling. Literature, theatre, and even architecture absorbed spiritualist influence. Writers crafted stories about quiet messages from beyond. Designers created rooms meant for calm contemplation, and artists explored themes of memory, transition, and the invisible threads connecting people across time. These creative works did not rely on spectacle. They focused on atmosphere and introspection, reflecting the soft, contemplative tone of the movement itself. Perhaps the most lasting legacy was the way spiritualism encouraged people to acknowledge their emotional landscapes. In a century marked by rapid change and frequent loss, it offered a framework for discussing longing, connection, and unanswered questions. Even those who did not practice séances felt the cultural shift toward exploring deeper feelings and accepting that life holds mysteries beyond easy explanation. Long after the original gatherings faded, the ideas they sparked continued to inspire conversation, creativity, and a quiet sense of wonder. The movement may have begun in small rooms lit by candlelight, but its influence stretched far beyond touching the world in ways still visible today. As the 19th century gave way to the modern world, the spiritualist movement did not disappear, it simply evolved. Idea 10. Transition into 20th century pop culture. The tools, rituals, and ideas that once shaped quiet Victorian parlors gradually found new life in a century defined by technology, mass media, and expanding entertainment industries. The early spirit boards, homemade and handcrafted in the 1800s, eventually became commercially produced items, sold in shops as conversation pieces, curiosities, or playful instruments for exploring the unknown. Their design grew more polished, their distribution widespread, and their presence more casual. Cinema, which emerged as a powerful artistic form in the early 1900s, played a big role in reshaping public imagination. Filmmakers were captivated by the gentle mystery of séances, moving planchettes, and the idea of invisible messages. Although these stories often leaned into dramatic imagery, they preserved the core themes of curiosity, wonder, and the longing to understand what lies beyond ordinary perception. Audiences around the world were introduced to the aesthetics of dimly lit rooms, softly glowing candles, and quiet communication rituals. Meanwhile, new spiritual and philosophical movements drew inspiration from 19th century spiritualism. Some groups focused on meditation, some on symbolism, others on personal intuition. While their practices varied widely, they all shared a common foundation: the belief that human experience includes layers that cannot always be explained through visible means. Popular magazines, radio programs, and later television shows embraced the topic as well. They offered gentle explorations of unusual stories, personal experiences, and historical accounts. This helped translate a once intimate Victorian practice into a broader cultural conversation, accessible to anyone curious enough to listen. Even as scientific understanding continued to grow, the fascination remained. For many, spiritualism became less about literal communication and more about exploring imagination, introspection, and emotional meaning. Is the movement blended into modern culture the same way a melody lingers after the song ends, not always in the foreground, but always present in some form? By the time the 20th century settled into its rhythm, the legacy of 19th century spiritualism had become part of everyday awareness, influencing art, entertainment, and the quiet way people think about life's unanswered questions. And so, as we close our quiet journey through the world of 19th century spiritualism, we are left with a picture far more nuanced than a simple trend or superstition. It was a movement born from longing, shaped by uncertainty, and carried forward by human imagination. From the quiet tapping sounds that captivated the Fox sisters, to the handcrafted talking boards that invited families to gather around small tables, every step of this story reflects something deeply human: the desire to connect, to understand, and to make sense of the unseen parts of life. The séances, the mediums, the parlor gatherings, and even the debates that surrounded them were not just curiosities of another era. They were expressions of hope during a time when the world felt fragile and fast-changing. Whether interpreted through emotion, psychology, creativity, or tradition, these practices helped people navigate the questions that so often sit just beneath the surface of daily life. And their legacy did not fade. It found new forms in literature, art, cinema, and modern conversations about intuition and the hidden layers of experience. Even today, echoes of that Victorian curiosity linger in the way we tell stories, explore mysteries, and reflect on the boundaries between what we see and what we feel. If tonight's gentle trip through history has given you a moment of calm wonder, a soft pause in a busy world, then we have honored the spirit of the people who once gathered in quiet rooms, hands resting lightly on wooden surfaces, listening for meaning in the silence. Thank you for being here with me, and for letting these old stories come alive again. Take a deep breath, let your mind settle, and I will see you in the next quiet journey. Wishing you a truly gentle and peaceful evening. In Nair, Ko Y, Sin Po the Ride, Int to Int D to D D to D to D D to D to